Alrighty, to finish up, so we did parallel lines, now let's look at perpendicular. Write the equation of the line that is perpendicular to y equals 3/4 x minus 1. So that equation is already solved for y. When I'm looking at that equation, I know that the slope of that one is 3/4. If I want a perpendicular line, I want the opposite reciprocal slope. So the opposite, if it's positive, I want a negative, and the flip, -4/3 is the slope of the line that we are writing a new equation for. They also want that line to pass through the point 3, -1. So now I have a slope, -4/3, and a point. We plug it into point slope form of the equation. We end up getting y minus a -3, which really means +3, equals -4/3 x minus 3. When I distribute that -4/3, we get -4/3 x, and -4/3 times a -3 equals +4. Last step to get y by itself, subtract 3 to both sides. So y is alone, y equals -4/3 x plus 1. So that one was really nice. The equation was solved for y. Not always the case. In example number 8, we still want the line perpendicular, so we want opposite reciprocal slopes. But the equation's not solved for y. So to solve the equation for y, we have to subtract x to both sides to start. When we subtract x to both sides, actually it's already done. Y equals -x minus 5 is our equation. So in that equation, the slope, the number in front of x, is -1. But we want the opposite reciprocal of that line. So the opposite of a negative is a positive. And if I made this fraction -1 over 1, when I flip it, it's still 1 over 1. It simplifies to +1. So we want a slope of +1, and it goes through the point 7, 3. When we plug that into point slope form, we get y minus 3 equals 1 times x minus 7. If I distribute 1 to both things, it doesn't change anything. I still have 1x minus 7. And then all I have to do is add 3 to both sides to get y by itself. -7 plus 3 is -4. So final answer is y equals, and I could write 1x, but there's no need. 1 times x is x. So y equals x minus 4. Okay, couple more examples and we're done. So sometimes they want to give us more information. They're telling us there's a line AB formed and they give us the points. If line L is perpendicular, and it's actually the perpendicular bisector. Oh, let me undo that. The perpendicular bisector. So remember, it means it crosses in the middle. It cuts the line in half. And since it's a perpendicular bisector, it also forms a right angle to line AB. So on the graph, in the picture on the grid, I plotted my points. A, -1, +4, and then B, 5, -2. So those are my black points, and I drew a line through them. That is the line we are discussing, line AB. Line L is going to cross that in the middle. It's going to cross it in the middle, so I need the midpoint of AB. So that's why I wrote midpoint here. And if you didn't remember, here's our midpoint formula. I wrote on the side for us, x1 plus x2, and then we divide that by 2. And I take y1 plus y2 and divide it by 2. That'll find us the midpoint. Once I know the midpoint on my line, then I just want to know the slope. If I find the slope of the line, if I want a line perpendicular, I want the opposite reciprocal. So I need to know the slope of line AB. So that's what this is, m of AB. That's our slope. When I calculate the slope, then I'll know where my line is and where it crosses. So for starters, we need the midpoint. Where is the midpoint of this graph going to be? Midpoint formula says that I take the x's, -1 plus 5, and divide it by 2. Well, -1 plus 5 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is +2. Then I take my y's, 4 plus a -2. Well, that's -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. There we go. Missing my negative. There we go. Okay, so there's my midpoint at 2. What am I missing? 2, -1. Ignore that. I don't need a negative. 4 plus -2 is +2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I was right the first time. There we go. So our point is at 2, 1. So that's what this red point on the line is. That is my midpoint. That's the middle of this segment, which looks pretty close in our graph. Okay, to find the rest of the point, well, I need to know what's the slope of the line, the black line. The slope is found by using y2 minus y1. So that's -2 minus 4 over x2 minus x1. So x2 was 5 minus a -1 really means we're adding. So as you can see, -2 minus 4 is -6 on top. And 5 plus 1 is +6. So when we simplify, we get a slope of -1. Well, a slope of -1 is the black line. We want line L to be perpendicular. So we want the opposite flip. Well, the opposite of a negative is a positive, and when I flip -1 over 1, it becomes +1. So I want it to cross through the point 2, 1, and I want it to have a slope of 1. So I plug it in to point slope form. Y minus 1, because that's my slope now. We're using our midpoint, because it needs to go through this point. So y minus 1 equals our slope of 1 times x minus 2. Well, if I distribute 1, it doesn't change anything. I still have x minus 2. So the only thing we have to do is add 1 to both sides. Y is now alone. We get x minus 1. Well, if that's our point, they want us to graph both AB, which we did in black, and line L to confirm your answers. So the graph, or the points for line L, well, it has a slope of +1 and a y-intercept of -1. So the second red point is down 1 on the y-axis, and my slope's up 1 to the left 1, up 1 to the left 1, up 1 to the left 1, and I keep going and going and going. And in the end, you have a line about like this. And you'll see it does form a right angle that looks pretty darn close, and it crosses through the middle. So these are called perpendicular bisectors. So one more example, number 10. We have a line xy, and as you can see, I graphed it already. Points x is our x1, y1. Point y is our x2, y2. So those are the black points on the graph, and I drew a line through it. If line J is the perpendicular bisector, forms a right angle, it goes through the middle of xy. Write a linear equation for line J. So we, again, need the midpoint to start. I need to know what's the middle of the graph. Where is it going to bisect at? So to find the midpoint, I take my x's, -9 and -3, add them together, and I get -12. -12 divided by 2 is -6. To find my y's of my midpoint, I take -7 plus 5 divided by 2. I get -2 divided by 2, or -1. Really, I'm missing my parentheses here, and I'm sorry about that. There's my parentheses. Because these are a coordinate. It's a point, the midpoint formula. So I didn't do that up there either. Here it is. I had my comma, I forgot my parentheses. In the end, our point is going to be -6, -1. We want the line to go through that. And as you can see, I put a red point already. -6, -1 looks about the middle of that graph, and it is on the line. If your point's not on the line, you're wrong. You need to double check. What are you doing wrong? Double check your points. Well, if I want a line to be perpendicular and go through that line, that point on the line, then I need to know what's the slope of xy. To find the slope of the black line. We do y2, which is 5, minus negative 7, which minus negative really means we're adding. So 5 plus 7 on top, negative 3 minus, again, a negative 9, which means we're adding. Negative 3 plus 9, it's going to be 6. So on top we have 12, on bottom we have 6. 12 divided by 6 is 2. If we want it to be perpendicular to the black line, I want the opposite, so a negative and a flip. Well, 2 is a whole number, I can put it over 1. So when I flip it, it becomes 1/2. We have a slope of negative 1/2 and the point negative 6, negative 1. Plug your point and your slope into point-slope form. So we get y minus negative 1, which again means add, y plus 1, equals negative 1/2 x minus negative 6, which again means add. So really I'm distributing negative 1/2 times x, I get negative 1/2 x. Negative 1/2 times a positive 6 is negative 3. Subtract 1 to both sides to get x by itself, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. So our final equation is y equals negative 1/2 x minus 4. So to graph this, my y-intercept is negative 4, so I'm going down 4 on the y-axis. That's what this point is. And then I'm going to go down 1 to the right 2, down 1 to the right 2, and keep that pattern going. And then I'll go up 1 to the left 2, and keep that pattern going. In the end, my line will look about like that. Crossing through the middle and perpendicular, it forms a right angle. Has to go through the point in the middle, has to go through the midpoint. So make sure you're double checking that. If you have any questions today, guys, please don't hesitate to ask the sub or go ask Mrs. Copeland while I'm gone. Email me if you need anything. Good luck on your homework. The key is posted on Canvas as well.